Japan's brand new defense strategy and their already existing massive economic influence in Southeast Asia will make them the West's new secret weapon against communist authoritarian China. Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida recently unveiled on December 16, 2022, his country's new 5-year, $320 billion defense plan that will acquire 500 US-made Tomahawk cruise missiles that will have the ability to strike deep inside of Chinese territory for the first time.
Japan's defense ministry has asked for a record level of spending on security next year,
though critics say this goes against the Japanese constitution.
Japan is the latest to up its military spending now.
It will effectively double the size of Japan's military budget and make them the world's third largest military spender right after the United States and China. It's not just an increase in weapons though. Their publicly released historic 2022 National Defense Strategy outlines sound justifications and legal arguments for this rearmament, as well as a change in their defense posture to deter aggression. Oh no, sound the alarms! The Japanese Empire has woken up from its slumber and they're getting ready to take over the world again. Obviously that's absolutely ridiculous, but tell that to North Korea and Russia and China, who all took turns coming out publicly to denounce Japan's new military plan as quote-unquote dangerous, and alluding to Japan's history as an expansionist empire. Chinese Communist Party tabloid Global Times said, quote, "Japan has a history of straying into militarism and committing aggression and crimes against humanity, which has brought disaster to the region and the world, and is now deviating from the track of post-war peaceful development. Apparently it's okay for China to increase defense spending and no one else can do so." Yes, even 80 years after the last World War, it's hard for some people to forget. In most modern discussions about great power politics, we completely overlook Japan, but I think if you take a closer analysis, it'll show that you have a great nation that holds the keys to keeping China in check. Many people don't understand just how much economic influence and soft power projection Japan has, despite having a somewhat self-imposed limited military. Even though China's GDP surpassed Japan's in 2010, Japan is still the largest sponsor of infrastructure projects in Southeast Asia. Yes, that's even bigger than China's massive efforts to expand with their Belt and Road Initiative throughout the region. As of 2021, Japan's investment projects in Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam stood at $259 billion, compared to China's $157 billion. This means Japan banks lend more to Southeast Asia's 5 largest economies than the United States, UK, France, all combined. Wait a second, so Myanmar can get millions of that sweet, sweet Japanese government money, but not me? Japan's massive construction projects across Asia give them tremendous credibility, respect, and influence in foreign policy decisions in the region. This makes Japan a closer rival to China than the US in this regard. Tokyo is an undisputed heavyweight champ of infrastructure investment in Southeast Asia, even though China gets all of the news reports about their Belt and Road Initiative. These projects include a subway system for Manila, a new east-west southern economic corridor that will link up Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, and Myanmar to promote free trade. These are some of the projects Japan is changing the world with. So how does Japan compete against China in this field? Well, they offer these developing countries low interest rates of about 0.25% for 30-year loans, which is really way lower than the 4% interest rates on the Chinese projects, which have been criticized for being debt traps for these developing countries. Honor may not win power, but it wins respect, and respect earns power. One of the reasons we mistakenly discount our ally Japan is because their post-war constitution was written by the US to avoid giving them the ability to ever field a powerful standing army again. But before we get into that, you guys are going to want to check out our new partner, CuriosityStream. They're like Netflix for learning, except you actually watch it and their shows are awesome. They have documentaries on all of the different topics that you like military history, technology, science, nature, travel, music, and much more. I watched their great 4-part series on the future of warfare that I know you guys will find valuable too. It covers in depth how artificial intelligence, cyber warfare, space, and special forces will shape the future battlefield. CuriosityStream creates exclusive new shows like this each week, so you're always in the loop on new information. If you enjoy entertaining, informative videos like this, then I see this as an investment in growing your your knowledge about the world. And it's all available to you at a very affordable price. I strongly recommend anyone interested in learning go to curiositystream.com/taskpurpose or scan the QR code for unlimited access available to watch on all of your favorite streaming devices or the web. Click the link below or go to curiositystream.com/taskpurpose and save 25% right now. Specifically, Article 9 forbids the Japanese from maintaining armed forces beyond a very limited self-defense force. For this reason, Japan's defense spending has averaged a lowly 0.90% of their total GDP since the 1960s. And so, they've been seen as a pacifist nation since the end of World War II. No, seriously, the trauma from World War II and the 2 atomic bombs dropped on their country made them reluctant to open up that Pandora's box ever again. However, over the years, this policy has been pulled, slapped, and bent over so as to no longer even resemble the Article 9 that it once was. And I'm here for it. This new move represents a 26.3% increase to defense spending this year and will be Japan's biggest military buildup since World War II. I'm telling you, Japan is a great power that has been in bare hibernation. Now, Japan has some major vulnerabilities that they need to protect that you might not realize, like their heavy reliance on security of regional shipping lanes, the increased risk of an invasion of Taiwan, and the reality that the United States can no longer go it alone when it comes to handling the growing importance of security in the Pacific. In order to understand this, we need to look at what's at stake. Japan is a mountainous, volcanic island chain located in the western Pacific Ocean. The islands arc from Russia in the north towards the Korean Peninsula in the south. So Russia and China are within a stone's throw distance from them, or maybe better put, they're within a short missile toss distance. The country has a population of 125.7 million citizens and an unbelievable massive GDP of $4.9 trillion, making them the world's third largest economy. They climbed that high by placing a heavy emphasis on education, making them one of the world's most literate countries. Following the end of World War II, Japan invested heavily into creating cheap textiles and advanced manufacturing, which now accounts for the majority of Japan's GDP and employment. According to the CIA World Factbook, 30% of Japan's economy is from their industry and 68% is from services. They're among the world's largest and most technologically advanced producers of motor vehicles, electronic equipment, and machine tools. Now, if only I was cultured enough to figure out how to work these eating utensils. A good way to understand Japan's current increase in military spending is to look at their last major increase prior to World War II. That increase was driven by geopolitical concerns, much like today's increase. At the time, Japan wanted to become a modern, industrialized nation, but they were faced with a severe shortage of agricultural farmland and oil resources, while at the same time they were experiencing a population explosion, kind of the opposite of today. This created great pressure on the nation to expand militarily into China and Korea in order to control those resources that were located just outside their borders. There was no free trade of the world and globalization like there is today. But by late 1941, this policy led to a direct confrontation with the United States and its allies. Once again, Japan's goals to rearm and build a new modern military is driven by geopolitical concern. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida described Japan and its people as being at a turning point in history, and that the ramp up in defense spending was, quote, my answer to the various security challenges that we face. Japan as a country is worried that China will attack Taiwan and threaten nearby Japanese islands. They're worried that this will disrupt their supply of advanced semiconductors and block sea lanes that supply Middle Eastern oil, which leads us to a key aspect to understanding a major vulnerability and weakness to Japan's strategic position today, that they need a large military to defend. Export.gov states that the Japanese are highly dependent upon the import of natural resources. For example, Japan is the largest net buyer of food products in the world. The United States is the leading supplier of its agricultural imports, as well as agricultural capital equipment and related technologies. Total US food, agricultural, and fishing exports to Japan were worth more than $13 billion in 2018. Japan is the world's largest importer of liquefied natural gas and the third largest coal importer. This means that while Japan is extremely well educated and technologically advanced, they have a geopolitical weakness of having all of their bare, essential necessities being imported. Japan no longer needs to conquer foreign lands for oil and food, but they need a strong military to protect the free trade and shipping lanes that send the oil to them. Japan is resource poor and heavily dependent on import from 94% of its primary energy supply, mainly from the Middle East, but also from their neighbor in Russia. This means Japan's energy supply structure is extremely vulnerable, which a more powerful military could help them feel more confident about being able to protect. Now, a record high 51% of Japanese voters believe that they should strengthen their defensive capabilities, something that would have been unthinkable in Japanese culture just a year ago. Let's put it this way, if Taiwan was lost, this would be a huge disaster for Japan. It would put their key maritime shipping lane into the line of fire. This shipping lane provides 94.5% of Japan's oil that they import from the Middle East after they stopped receiving oil from Russia for the past 6 months. With all of these security concerns, you'd think that there would be some kind of NATO, but for Asia against China. And it's true, in the decades following World War II, the United States considered creating a Pacific Pact, something similar to NATO, but for the countries in the East, like South Korea, Japan. President Truman actually asked General MacArthur about this during the Korean War on October 15, 1950, according to State Department records. He said, quote, "I would like to hear your views, General, on the possible Pacific Pact or some other arrangement similar to that in the Atlantic." General MacArthur replied, quote, "A Pacific Pact would be tremendous, but due to the lack of homogeneity of the Pacific nations, it would be very difficult to put into effect. It's not impossible to get a pact since they are so non-homogeneous. They have no military forces, only the United States has the forces. All they want is the assurance of security from the United States. But what if the United States could no longer just completely assure that security on their own?" The United States did establish the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, or SEATO, in 1954, but it was disbanded in 1977. Part of the problem is that Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand do not share a land border with China or even with each other, which makes it tougher to get them all to agree on how to act against China. It's easier for NATO countries in Europe to see a common goal in deterring China. The condition of a person is revealed by his dreams. It would be good to make companions of your dreams and to put forth effort. Yamato Tesamoto, The Book of the Samurai. Japan's view of the future is not pursued alone. They're doing this alongside their allies. If we look more closely at Article 9, Constitution of Japan in 1947, we see that it states, "Aspiring sincerely to an international peace based on order, the Japanese people forever renounce war as a sovereign right of the nation and the threat or use of force as means of settling international disputes. Land, sea, and air forces, as well as other war potential, will never be maintained. The right of the belligerency of the state will not be recognized." This constitution is often called the McCarthy Constitution because it was dictated by him at the end of World War II. In 1947, General MacArthur and the US imagined a post-war Japan that would stay disarmed and would be overseen by new United Nations. But in hindsight, this was obviously never realistic, and ended up being very short-lived. In the 1940s, US wartime ally in China lost to the communists and escaped to Taiwan in 1949. China then backed North Korea in the 1950s, which has since repeatedly fired missile tests over Japan. But the West was holding out hope that once China was added to the World Trade Organization in 2001 and folded into the international community, they would become democratic over time. As it became clear that they were headed towards an authoritarian form of government, the realization that Japan's military would need to become important again grew. So, in fear of Japan falling to communism, Japan's industry was largely unchanged following World War II. Of the 325 companies originally slated for possible breakup, by 1948, only 11 were ordered to split. If Japan's military power were rebuilt, the United States would have a powerful ally with similar values about democracy and freedom to the United States. Freedom House Index rates Japan as having free elections and free press, unlike China. Yes, Japan is a constitutional monarchy, but they have a freely elected parliamentary government that chooses their prime minister. Japan has always been a society of great warriors. Until recently, the warrior tradition has been deeply seeped into their cultural identity. Japan's warrior culture influences Western soldiers to this day, with the concept of the warrior monk. I like to think of the warrior monk as a gentleman in the sheets, but a fighter in the streets. How do I say this without sounding like a weebo? Their Bushido code of virtues held them to a strict code of moral conduct that followed righteousness, loyalty, honor, respect, honesty, courage, and consistency. It's pretty obvious to me that this Bushido Code influenced what the US Army today calls their core values. Ironically, it's always been the American government who's been pressuring and asking Japan to rearm and strengthen their military. In 1952, when the US occupation of Japan ended, they did not want to rearm, and they were still horrified by the devastation that the war had brought them. Japan reluctantly agreed to the minimum standing paramilitary force that the US would allow of 75,000 national police reserves to defend their islands. Since then, their force has grown to 260,000, and the interpretation of the Article 9 clause has been the subject of fierce debate within Japan, with some groups believing everything from Japan needs to remain pacifist, and other nationalist groups believing that the article should be completely abolished and Japan should maintain nuclear weapons. On July 1st, 1954, they recognized the Defense Agency and National Security Force to become what it is today, known as the Japanese Ground Self-Defense Force, or the de facto post-war Japan Army. De facto is a bit of fancy pants Latin for in reality or matter of fact for the slow people like me sitting in the back of the room. So it's the US who are most enthusiastic now for Japan's new 2022 defense strategy. US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan stated, quote, "Today, Japan has taken a bold and historic step to strengthening and defend the free and open Indo-Pacific." You would think that the rebuilding of Japan's military would mirror Germany in some ways, but that's actually not the case. Germany's constitution places no limits on their military because they were quickly adopted into the NATO membership, which optimized their military for collective defense during the Cold War against the threat of the Soviet Union. There was no similar fire burning to counter China at the same time, as they weren't really seen as a major threat. A warrior is worthless unless he rises above others and stands strong in the midst of a storm. So, just how powerful is Japan's self-defense forces, and can this new national defense policy hope to deter China? What we don't realize is Japan already had a strong military, and this change will only make it stronger. So all these headlines about Japan abandoning pacifism aren't really accurate. A few different major world events over the past few decades since World War II pushed Japan to rearm and pass legislation that essentially took the handcuffs off themselves. These events were the 9/11 terrorist attacks against the United States of America, China's growing ambitions in their waters that could threaten their core interests of imports, North Korea's expansion of their nuclear arsenal, and the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine. The Anti-Terrorism Special Measure Law was passed on October 29, 2001, allowing the Japanese Defense Forces for the first time to contribute to international military efforts. Then, on June 8, 2006, the Cabinet of Japan endorsed a bill elevating the defense agency to full-fledged cabinet-level Ministry of Defense, and in 2015, the Japanese military legislation allowed Japan to defend allies in combat. In fact, a Credit Suisse survey published in 2015 ranked Japan as the world's fourth most powerful military behind Russia, China, and the United States. So will this new money be invested in a giant Japanese invasion force sent to conquer Korea and China? Well, let's take a look. Ryan Ashley, a Foreign Policy Research Institute analyst, did a great job breaking down Japan's 2022 national defense strategy. $7 billion will go towards cyber warfare, $7 billion will go towards space programs, and $6 billion towards a combined 6th-generation stealth fighter aircraft development like the F-35 program from the United States. The most head-turning investment by far is their counter-strike ability. This means Japan will acquire long-range missiles that can hit ground-based military sites up to 3,000 kilometers away, aka they can outpoke China. Currently, Japan's missiles are only good for a limited short range of only a few hundred kilometers, and they're mainly used for short-range defense. Japan will purchase 500 of the US-made Tomahawk land attack missiles that have been called a left-of-strike ability, meaning it can hit an adversary's missile before it can be launched. I say adversary, but let's be real, I'm talking about China, North Korea, and Russia. These Tomahawk missiles and stealth fighter jets require a vast network of military satellites to support, though, with their new capabilities, which is why I think there's this huge $7 billion investment in space programs. If we look directly at Japan's 2022 defense strategy, it clearly states one of their main justifications for legally expanding their forces now. China continues to advance its unilateral changes to the status quo by force and such attempts in the East China Sea and South China Sea. The change was always going to be inevitable because China has increased military spending and aggressively pursued their territorial claims in the South China Sea, and specifically around the Senkaku Islands, which Japan administers. These are 5 core islands that have oil and gas resources. This new defense strategy sees Tokyo plan to increase defense spending to the NATO standard of 2% of GDP in 2027, or around $80 to $90 billion instead of the $40 billion they're currently spending. Japan is technically not obligated to reach this benchmark since it's not a member of the Western Security Alliance, but they're going to carry their weight obligation or not. This will give Japan more political clout on the international stage when it comes to military and security actions against North Korea. Much of the increased budget will go to doubling their spending on logistics, maintenance, and spare parts in 2023, as we've recently seen and learned that neglecting unsexy maintenance can lead to massive problems. The end is important in all things. Japan is an often overlooked ally in Asia in the defense of free and open elections and a shared vision with the West for the future of humanity. Japan's low-interest economic development programs across Southeast Asia and their cultural ties to this region put them in a better position to influence this area than the West. I think growing their nation's military power will be a good thing for the free world. If you found this video valuable, please consider hitting the like button. I'm your average infantryman, Chris Cappy. Over and out.